Welcome to the Procurement Targeted Issues. This was originally presented as Procurement 501 at the Wellness and Learning Conference in 2018. It has been updated to reflect recent USDA guidance. I'm Catherine Hodges from the Department of Education, Office of Nutrition Programs and Services. The recorded webinar, Procurement Basics, covered defining procurement. It touched on procurement regulations. It talked about various procurement methods. It defined small purchase thresholds. It stressed good procurement principles and practices and the importance of detailed specifications. And it provided a list of prohibitive procurement practices. The recorded webinar, Procuring Locally, built on that information and covered ways to procure, contract requirements, documentation to maintain, writing clear specifications, defining local and incorporating geographic preference, evaluating bids, managing the contract, and using forward contracts. The recorded webinar procurement process covered planning or forecasting, writing specifications, advertising the solicitation, awarding and managing the contract, contract elements, and contract disputes. The recorded webinar Procurement in the Real World covered reminders in defining procurement, regulations, the procurement process, procurement principles, buying American, and the procurement review. The scope of this presentation, Procurement Targeted Issues, is centered around issues that were findings from a recent management evaluation of the state agency by USDA. Specifically, I will be touching on concerns surrounding debarment and suspension attestation, limitations and responsibilities when participating in a group purchasing organization or group buying organization, and Buy American regulations. Federal regulations require that every purchase made out of the nonprofit food service account be made using a procurement process, no matter how small the purchase is. The regulations do set out a different process for micro, small, and large purchases. Purchases under the small purchase threshold can follow the informal procurement method, which is simpler, but it is still a procurement process that must be followed. We will talk more in a bit about the informal and formal procurement methods, but first, let's talk about what the regulations are. Procurement regulations flow from federal to state to local. You should follow the strictest regulations that apply to you. If local or state regulations conflict with federal regulations, follow the federal regulations. First, debarment and suspension. It is the SAU's responsibility during the contract and renewal process to verify the status of the vendor and their ability to receive payments using federal funds. This is the suspension and debarment certification that is included in each contract renewal. The suspension and debarment certificate is to protect the integrity of government programs by ensuring that only honest, ethical, and otherwise responsible persons and companies participate in the federal program. A suspension excludes or disqualifies a person or company from bidding on, receiving, or participating in federally funded contracts or grants for a temporary period of time pending the completion of an investigation or legal or administrative proceeding. A debarment excludes or disqualifies a person or company for a specific period of time, generally not longer than 3 years. Both have government-wide effect that applies to all federal programs and procurement. What do these terms mean? Basically, if a vendor has been prohibited in accepting federal funds for any reason, they also cannot accept payments made through others using federal funds. For example, school districts cannot use claim reimbursements, federal, to pay for a bill from a vendor who has been debarred from accepting federal funds. So how can you monitor this requirement? Any contract that exceeds $25,000 for goods and/or services must have one of these 3 items completed: a provision in the contract, a debarment certificate on file, or they would have been looked up in the Excluded Parties List System, or EPLS. For the initial contract year, there can be a provision in the contract that stipulates that the contractor has not been debarred from accepting payment made with federal dollars. Any subsequent renewals must include the debarment certificate. The suspension and debarment certificate is a document that the contractor signs attesting to the fact that they have not been debarred from accepting federal funds. The third option is for the contractee, you, to log into the EPLS system. You will need to have access capability and have the company's identifying information. This process would be completed for each year of the contract cycle. The process and the results would have to be documented appropriately. Now let's move on to GPO or GBO organizations. That's group purchasing or group buying organizations. Here are just a few of the citations that you can use to research this issue. Guidance Memo 05-2017, 2 CFR 200, 318 to 326, 2 CFR 200, 403, and in general 2 CFR 200 subpart E. 2 CFR 200, 403 and 2 CFR 200 subpart E requires that costs paid from the nonprofit food service account be reasonable, allocable, and necessary, in addition to being allowable. Is the price being paid reasonable for the product? Can the cost be allocated to food service appropriately? Is the product being purchased necessary? Are only allowable costs charged to the food service account? 2 CFR 200, 318 to 326 stipulates that all procurement be conducted in a manner that maximizes fair and open competition. Failure to competitively procure goods and services is a violation of federal regulations and may result in delays, disputes, findings of noncompliance, and subsequently costs being disallowed. Membership to a GBO or GPO may involve paying a fee in addition to the price of products and services purchased. However, paying a fee does not constitute compliance with the competitive procurement process that you are required to conduct when procuring products and services. If the membership fee exceeds the local small purchase threshold, the purchase of GPO or GBO services must have been procured competitively. You are still responsible in making sure the bid and award process was done properly by the GPO or GBO. You are still responsible in making sure that the prices that you are being charged match the quotes provided in the RFP proposal. You are still responsible in making sure that the product coming through your door is compliant with all regulations, including Buy American. GPO and GBO contracts, as well as food service management contracts, must stipulate that vendors shall ensure compliance with the Buy American regulations. What a segue into our next topic. USDA's focus balances feeding kids with supporting U.S. agriculture. To meet the second side of that scale, the first side must purchase, whenever feasibly possible, agricultural foods that are grown in the United States. Buy American regulations pertain to the food components of a meal. All unprocessed agricultural food component products must be domestic. Any processed agricultural food component products must be processed domestically, and over 51% of the actual agricultural products must have been grown in the U.S. As product is coming through your door, check the labels to see if they comply with Buy American. If the labels identify any of the not so good phrases, look into getting documentation that supports exceptions. So the good is the product of, grown in, produced in. Not so good is manufactured in, packaged in, distributed by, or no reference at all. Your vendor should be willing to provide you with U.S. products or provide you with exception documentation regarding availability of product and the cost of product. If the product label does not clarify country of origin, ask that the vendor identify it on the packing slip, receiving report, and/or the invoice. Let them know that if they are providing a non-domestic product, then you expect and require exception documentation. AMS market news can be used to document significant price thresholds for exception 2. Please keep in mind that exception documentation is transactional. Only a very few products can be globally waived, such as pineapple or mandarin oranges. All RFPs and subsequent contracts for goods, example Cisco, and services, example a food service management company, must include Buy American regulations. You identify in the RFP what your requirement is. The requirement is then reiterated in your contract. If they do not adhere to the Buy American regulations, they have just broken your contract. If you are using a food service management company, it is your responsibility to verify that the company's contracts with their vendors also include the requirement to comply with the Buy American regulations. Please do not hesitate to contact us with any procurement questions. Thank you.